Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. I was a fresh graduate, armed with the necessary skills but lacking real-world experience, when I joined a small team working with a major client at the company. Despite my qualifications, navigating the complexities of office politics, contract negotiations, and power dynamics was a daunting challenge. The client had assigned us an incredibly complex and demanding task: developing a prototype solution to a technical problem they faced. As the sole team member with the relevant expertise, the burden fell squarely on my shoulders while the others primarily managed the project. At the outset, our team lead, who was effectively my boss, promised me a substantial bonus worth around 30% of my starting salary. Apparently, this bonus was a direct financial contribution from the client themselves, and the wheels were already in motion to secure this additional compensation. It sounded great, but there was a catch: the agreement wasn't documented in writing. Over the next 2 years, no such bonus materialized. During our periodic in-person meetings, I would half-heartedly inquire about it, only to receive verbal reassurances that it was on its way. In hindsight, I should have been more assertive and followed up with a written request. But as a newcomer, I was reluctant to rock the boat. As the company's business with the client expanded due to the success of our project, the clients even showcased my hard work at international conferences, claiming it as their intellectual property and proprietary solution. While the project rightfully belonged to them, the lack of acknowledgement left a bitter taste in my mouth. Worse still, both companies were profiting from my 2 years of painstaking effort, yet there was still no sign of the promised bonus. Nearing the end of my 3rd year, my work contract was up for renewal. The company wanted to retain me to continue the project, as I was the only one with in-depth knowledge of its intricacies. The plan was for me to transition the project from the company to the client, a process that would span several more years. I even underwent specialized training with the clients, making me the only individual capable of taking on this role for the foreseeable future. For this extended engagement, I was offered a decent salary increase. However, the missing bonus had eroded my trust in the company. During a contract negotiation meeting, I raised the issue one last time. The team lead and my boss claimed they had no recollection of such an agreement or offer, suggesting that I should have obtained it in writing. Fair enough. Some lessons are indeed learned the hard way, but the worst realization was that the funds earmarked for my long overdue bonus were now being allocated to hire an intern to assist me on the project. It was almost a one-to-one calculation, with the client sponsoring the intern using the very funds intended as my bonus. It was the final week of my work contract, and Human Resources had invited me to review the document before signing it. Given the time, money, training, and resources invested in my continued involvement with the project, it was assumed that I would be on board for the long haul, and the contract was merely a formality. What happened next is something I cannot recommend, but it was a moment of impulsive recklessness fueled by a sense of vengeance over the missing bonus, and a bruised ego for wrongly trusting them without securing the agreement in writing. The tables had turned. There was no written agreement on my end either. I had not yet signed the contract. After carefully double-checking my emails, I found no written commitment to continue on this project or even with this job. In fact, I had only verbally expressed enthusiasm about the project during meetings with my boss and the clients. The first workday after my contract expired, I was officially no longer employed by the company or associated with the clients. Without warning or notice, I abandoned them. On the preceding day, I had left my company pager and phone in the office locker. A few personal possessions on my desk had to be sacrificed. I logged out of the work email and messaging systems, severing all lines of communication. It was a blissful feeling, knowing that I had likely caused a major catastrophe for the company, at least for the next few years. While I couldn't predict the exact consequences of my abrupt and unannounced exit, I didn't have time to dwell on their plight. I had to become selfish, dip into my savings, relocate to another city far away, and start anew. This was an arduous process, especially without references, considering the professional bridge I had burned. Nevertheless, my skills eventually spoke for themselves. The last I heard about the company was from a former colleague I reconnected with on a professional networking platform a few years later. Apparently, the company still exists, but it's a mere shadow of its former self, as things went horribly awry after my departure. As I had anticipated, they lost the major client. No one else possessed the necessary skills to continue the work. The clients are still players in their respective sectors, but fortunately, I have not had to interact with them so far. However, I could not have predicted the domino effect that followed within the company. Several other large clients soon followed suit because staff had to be reshuffled to handle my project, leaving these clients feeling neglected. Now the company is downsizing and in the process of being acquired by a competitor. From what I gathered, another casualty of my revenge was my former boss, who developed a substance abuse problem around that time to cope with the stress. Stress that was partially triggered by being unable to contact me for months during a critical period of the company's expansion. To add to the turmoil, a divorce ensued as the work-related stress took a toll on their marriage. When my former colleague explained all this, I felt a twinge of guilt, and to some extent, I still do. Is it enough for me to right my wrongs and write an apology? Not really, but perhaps I'm wrong about that. I'm open to suggestions. Note: my former boss has tried to reach out to me a few more times in the years after the company's downfall, but I remained too preoccupied to respond, continuing my ghosting strategy. And so, here's to Dumbass Inc. I hope it was worth the measly bonus I deserved. I was brought on as a new recruit, a junior who had to lead the project from the outset. I had to work hard and learn new skills outside of regular hours, only for the wealthy clients and middle management to reap the rewards, not on my vengeful watch. I'm sharing this story because it's somewhat cathartic. The company did some crappy things, and so did I. But that missing bonus still gnaws at me from time to time. I could have used it to buy a house and settle down in that town. I wouldn't have been displaced for months, living hand to mouth and having to rebuild myself for years following that incident. Abandoning the project and the job was professional suicide at the time, but my revenge ensured that no matter what happened, I would persevere without groveling back to that company. Of course, this arrogant behavior of mine, born out of resentment over the missing bonus, has at least one unwritten chapter remaining. At my current workplace, where I am now a stakeholder, I am proposing a new version of that old project I started a decade ago, but never got to see through to completion. It would be satisfying to showcase a patent during an international conference attended by those former major clients. That would be the real bonus. The next one is an entitled people story. I've lived in my cozy little house for over 20 years now. It's nothing fancy, just a simple 2-bedroom home with a small yard, but it's been the perfect place to raise my family. My neighbor Jim moved in about 5 years ago. He seemed nice enough at first. We'd chat occasionally while doing yard work or getting the mail. Basic neighbor stuff. The problem started when Jim decided to plant a huge oak tree right along the property line between our houses. I nicely asked him if he could move it more towards the center of his yard instead. I was worried the roots could damage the foundation of my home or that falling branches could hit my roof. But Jim insisted it would be fine and that I was overreacting. Over the next few years, I watched nervously as that tree grew taller and wider. The branches stretched further across my yard each season. Jim never bothered to trim them back. I'd occasionally hear crashes on my roof as small twigs or acorns fell. I'd just wince and hope it wasn't doing any real damage. Last summer we had a huge storm blow through our town. The wind was howling something fierce. I was sitting in my living room when I heard an almighty crack outside. I rushed to the window just in time to see one of the main branches from Jim's oak tree come crashing down onto my roof. It left a massive hole where it punched through the shingles and roof decking. Water started pouring in immediately. I was furious. This was exactly what I had warned Jim about for years. I banged on his door, absolutely livid, and told him he needed to pay for the repairs. Jim got real defensive and tried to blame the storm, saying it was an act of God. He refused to take any responsibility. At that point, I'd had it. Storm or not, it was his negligent planting and lack of tree maintenance that caused this damage. I called my insurance company and filed a claim to get my roof fixed immediately before any further damage could happen. But I also took Jim to small claims court to recoup the costs. In court, I presented photos showing how overgrown and unchecked the branches were. An arborist I hired testified that the tree's growth was unbalanced on the side facing my home. He said this indicated lack of proper pruning. Jim still tried to insist it was the storm's fault, not his neglect. But the judge wasn't having it. She agreed the branch most likely fell because it was allowed to grow too heavy on my side. She ordered Jim to reimburse my insurance company for the nearly $8,000 roof repair costs. Sweet justice. Jim was absolutely fuming after the verdict. He cussed me out outside the courtroom saying I'd regret this. A few days later, I came home to find that he had chopped the entire oak tree down to a stump out of spite. It was an eyesore now, but at least the threat was gone. Jim did eventually pay up, although he still insists he did nothing wrong. Needless to say, we don't chat over the fence anymore. I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt at first, but his reckless planting and refusal to take responsibility left me no choice but to turn to the court. Maybe next time he'll think twice before planting trees right on the property line. All's well that ends well. The next one is a petty revenge story. About 2 years ago, I wanted to buy some stuff for my daughter from an online listing. I agreed with the seller on a price, and we set up a meeting for me to pick up the items. But just before the meeting, the seller texted me saying he sold the items to someone else at a higher price. I was pretty ticked off because we had agreed on a deal, and I had made arrangements to meet him. Just to mess with him, I told him I'd actually be willing to pay a higher amount, and he agreed to sell me the products again. We arranged to meet at a subway station to do the deal, and 5 minutes after the agreed time, I texted him to say I'd be a little late. 15 minutes later, I said I was almost there, just about 10 minutes away. I kept texting him similar messages for over an hour, asking him to wait for me and that I'd be there soon. Obviously, I was at home the whole time. So after about 90 minutes of making him wait at the subway, I texted him saying I found the same items cheaper elsewhere and that I wouldn't be coming after all. I don't think he understood the move, but it felt good anyway. The next one is an entitled parent's story. My 21F stepmom is a horrible entitled person. I still currently live with her and my dad and have since I was 9 years old. Ever since I was a child, she came into my life when I was 4 or 5, she has treated me like garbage, especially in comparison to her own children. My brother, technically stepbrother, is 1 year older than me, and she has always treated him better than me. I don't resent him for it. Him and I have always gotten along, especially with our mutual hatred for his mother. There was a lot of physical abuse when I was little, but it evolved into mental emotional abuse as I got older. She's never liked the idea of me having things, especially money. My stepmom is horrible with her money. She gets a paycheck and immediately goes shopping and blows all of her money on ugly home decor. At one point, when she didn't have a job for a year and we were struggling, she would spend my dad's money on things and donate hundreds of dollars to her church when we couldn't afford it. As a kid, occasionally my family would give me money for holidays or as little gifts throughout the year. My dad would usually slip me $20 when I would go to hang out with friends, so I could afford food and admission to places. My stepmom did not like this and would get angry every time I got money. My dad and I have been sneaking him giving me money for years because she would freak if she found out. My grandma would give me money a few times a year. My stepmom would often go through my entire room, including my wallet, and she would get mad at me when she found money. She loved to go through my room to throw away things, especially keepsakes, and find things to rage about. When she would go through my wallet, she often stole money from it. She also often took half the coins I would collect in my piggy bank on several occasions. Once my grandma gave me $30 as a gift after spending a day with her. My grandma gave both me and my brother money on holidays, but she didn't give him money as often as me because he has his mom and dad's family that gives him money and not me. Also, my grandma saw me more often since my brother lived at his dad's house most of the time. This makes sense to me. Me and my brother are both okay with this. My brother has always been okay with the amounts of money we get separately from our families. My stepmom decided this wasn't okay though and found the $30 and demanded I owed half of it to my brother. My brother didn't want me to give him the money. He told his mom it wasn't fair to take from me, but she forced me to give it to him in front of her. I honestly believe she used to steal my money to give to him. I tried telling my dad about her stealing my money, but I don't think he ever fully believed me, so I just dealt with always having less money than I thought. This sucked as I have always been pretty good at saving. Before I figured out she was stealing from me, I thought I was going crazy because I always had less money than I thought. When I confronted my stepmom about going through my things, she would deny it. She even told my dad she never even went in my room except to empty my laundry basket. This was definitely not true as my things were always rearranged or completely missing. When I got a little older, around 15, she decided a new way to punish me. She came to me one day with a list of chores. I already had chores, but she decided to write them down. And she had exact times and expectations for each and every chore I was supposed to do. If I didn't have chores done by a really specific time on a specific day each week, I would be punished. These times were often really early in the morning, and she knew I liked to sleep in when I could, and I was not allowed to do the chore the day before. The punishments? She decided that taking things from me, like technology, wasn't working. I only had things taken from me once or twice. So instead, if I didn't do something right, she would charge me. I would be fined for not doing a chore exactly when she wanted it done. One week, my brother used the last roll of toilet paper and didn't refill the basket of extras in our bathroom. My stepmom freaked at me for not refilling it and charged me $10. When I defended myself, she just got more angry. She charged me only a handful of times because I was typically good at doing my chores. When I complained to my dad and showed him her written paper explaining the charging process, he told me to just go along with it to make her happy. One last big incident occurred when I finally wised up and started keeping my money in a lockbox. In high school, I started getting more money as I would get larger gifts from my side of the family, and in the summer I would work with my grandma and she would pay me at the end a couple hundred in cash. I kept all my money in my lockbox thinking I was finally safe from her snooping and stealing. One summer day, my stepmom waited for everyone to leave the house and came to confront me about my lockbox. She demanded that I open it for her and I refused. She began to accuse me of using it to hide drugs, which I never used, and said if I didn't open it, it meant that I had drugs and would be in trouble. I got scared and I stupidly opened it in front of her. She saw my maybe $400 and grabbed it and began screaming at me. She knew most of it was from my grandma, and when I tried to defend myself and say I had been saving it, she called me a selfish liar. She said I was selfish for having so much money, and I asked if I should just be spending it instead. She told me I would be selfish for spending it on myself. So basically she was jealous I had money and wanted me to give it to her, spend it on her or my brother. She screamed at me and called me awful names for at least half an hour and eventually had me literally cornered in my room. She grabbed some clothes off of my laundry basket and held them over her head as if she was about to throw them at me/hit me. She turned last second and threw them forcefully on the ground next to me instead and stormed out of the room. The whole time I was sobbing and panicking. She came back to my door to yell and call me names and I saw red. Literally, my vision went completely red and I collapsed on the ground in a sobbing mess. I screamed with all my might for her to just leave me alone. I packed up my money in my lockbox and took off for a friend's house. My stepmom texted me and said I could stay the night with my friend. I realize now she probably did this so she could get her side of the story to my dad before I could. I hid my lockbox at my friend's house for a couple weeks, and luckily my stepmom never came after me about it again. I stopped using it, and when I was 17, my dad finally let me open a bank account. I don't think anyone in my family completely knows about this incident. She purposefully waited to do this when no one was home so she could corner me and berate me. All this time, it hasn't been like my brother hasn't been getting money. He got money from his family and from his dad. I found out after high school that he had been getting a weekly allowance from her all through high school. She always bought him clothes and food and video games that he wanted. She would constantly stop to buy random things for him even when he didn't want the things. She would often even buy him, make him dinner, and not me. She bought me clothes maybe 3 times in my life. My dad would buy me clothes once a year for school. I was allowed a few pairs of pants and some shoes, and she never liked that, and we had to hide it. My dad bought me a jacket once, and we had to sneak it into the house. In middle school, my whole family went to the mall, and I found a nice $10 shirt that I wanted for church since I didn't have any nice shirts. When my dad bought it for me, she got angry that I hadn't purchased it myself. I cried every time I wore that shirt because I felt so guilty. In late high school, she started to expect me to buy all my hygiene products for myself. If my dad took me with him to get groceries and he bought me a box of pads, she would get mad at me and call me selfish for not buying them for myself. She did this with soap and toothpaste too. She bought hygiene products for my brother all the time though. We would go to movies with extended family and she would pay for my brothers and cousins' tickets but would expect me to buy my own. Once I had a gift card for the movie theater and she forced me to use it on her ticket even though I was saving it to use with friends. At this point, I buy everything for myself. I'm tired of her complaining. I also can't walk into the house with bags from shopping, even if I bought food or hygiene products, because she will get angry at me. She gets mad when I get gifts from people too. I hide everything. I keep all of my money in my bank account. I don't let her ever see me get anything new. Recently, she asked me if I needed anything from the store and I told her no. She told me, "You know, we're your parents, we can buy you things you need like toothpaste." And I laughed and told her no, I would do it myself. Because of this, and God so many other horrible things she's done and said, I absolutely hate her. She acted so surprised when she found out I was depressed, and even more surprised when I said I wanted to move out. She would say, "I don't know why you are so depressed, and I don't know why you would want to leave." I've always kind of been just a kid to push off chores onto, as I was always expected to clean. She would especially expect me to clean up after my siblings all the time. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.